My name is Economides. I'm a professor of economics at the Stern School of Business of New York University.
Can hear you.
And yes, you can hear me?
Okay.
Okay. Now?
Yeah.
Okay. I am a professor of economics at New York University Stern School of Business, and I'm also visiting the Haas School of Business at Berkeley. So I'm going to discuss the Greek crisis, mainly from an economics point of view. One of the ancient gods, Poseidon, looking over the storm of Greece. And what's the crisis? I think this picture is probably the best representation of the crisis. Here is the place where the money is supposed to be in Greece, and there is very little, which you can see has fallen off down there. So Greece has three big economic problems. First, it has significant public sector deficits. I will speak in English. I hope everybody understands. Speaking both in Greek and English will take too much time, so I'll just stick with English. So the public sector is very inefficient, and there is a lot of corruption in what the government buys, the process through which it buys, the procurement process. At the same time, there's a tremendous amount of tax evasion, and Greece needs a new type of tax enforcement. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that over time, debt has accumulated, huge amounts of debt. And right now, Greece cannot pay it back. So it needs to find ways to cut it, so-called haircuts, to reduce the debt. And problem number three, is the lack of competitiveness. Wages have increased a lot in Greece because of significant union power without productivity increases. At the same time, certain sectors of the economy, so-called professions in Greek, have stayed closed. And these are a large part of the economy. Taxi cabs, trucks, pharmacies, engineering services, legal services, notaries, and so on. And lastly, about 10 years ago, Greece got into the euro, and therefore it doesn't have an independent currency that it can change its exchange rate. So it has these three big economic problems. Additionally, it has big social problems. There is a general breakdown of law and order. There are hundreds of strikes. Here is a website, aperigia.gr, which people consult every day to see what's on strike and what's not. I mean, are the buses working, is the subway working, and so on and so on. Downtown Athens has been burned a number of times by the people who call themselves those against state power, even before the economic crisis, talking all the way back in 2008, when there was no economic crisis. And there have been deaths of people who were working during the demonstrations at Marfin Bank. And the most striking thing I saw last week is that in the most central part of Athens, right in front of the National Academy on Panepistimiou Street, 3 blocks away from Syntagma Square, from the parliament, there were busts of Kazantzakis and El Greco, and in the same night, they were stolen by thieves and melted for money, to make money out of the cupboard. Now, it's not surprising that the thieves would like to steal them. The surprising thing is that the government or the police is unable to control something like that 3 blocks away from the parliament. Millions of illegal immigrants, people estimate about 2 million, have come in. And Greece is a country of 10 million people, and suddenly there are 2 million extra people. And extreme organizations, such as the Golden Dawn Party, tries to take over the functions of the police, since the police is not working so well. There has been a sharp increase in drug addiction, especially among the immigrants. So let me give you an idea of the Greek economy at a glance. The production in Greece is about $300 billion, which makes the average income about $27,000, which is the 29th richest nation in the world. But in fact, Greeks are much more prosperous than that. Why? Because there is a big part of the economy that is not reported, so-called black economy or informal economy. And this is a large amount, 30 to 40% above the reported amount. And if you included that, then the average income would be 35 to 38,000. So much higher than the 29th richest country in the world. And the black economy, of course, doesn't pay taxes, it doesn't support the various activities of the government. The industries of Greece. First industry, services. Most important industry, tourism, part of services. Second industry, production, light production, light industries, like textiles and things of that sort. Third industry, agriculture. But remember, agriculture is right now a very, very small part of the Greek economy. It's only 3%. So some people say we should really put all our resources in agriculture. It's unlikely that it's going to make such a big difference because it's so small. Now, Greece joined the euro in 2001 at 340 old drachmas. It's the 15th largest economy among the 27 in the EU, not counting the black economy. It's definitely the largest economy in the Balkans. It's bigger than all the other Balkan countries combined. And it's a significant regional investor. There is a lot of investment from Greece, from Greek companies, to the Balkans and to Turkey. It has a long-term adversary, Greece, Turkey, and because of that, Greece spends a very large percentage of its national income on defense. In fact, it spends the largest amount of percentage on defense than any other country except the United States in NATO. And it buys weapons from a large number of different countries, from the US, from Russia, from China, France, Germany, UK, Israel, and so on. It has very small domestic arms production, and it has had a relatively large conscript army, which is being reduced in the last couple of years. Since 2009, Greece has been banking. Now it's 3 years it has been banking. How did it happen? From 82 to 2009, Greece borrowed about $300 billion, which is equal to a year production in Greece, a year GNP. It is a debt of $27,000 per capita. And additionally, the European Union gave to Greece as gifts, subsidies, direct gifts, and so on, another $300 billion. So Greece got a lot of money, 2 times the annual production. One as a gift, second as borrowing. But even with this money, which is a huge amount of money really, Greece went back. And essentially, and I feel a bit bad saying this because this is my generation, but the present generation of Greeks ate all its money and the money of its children and of the grandchildren. So, and they really wiped the place out. Here is a picture of the debt as a percentage of national product. The lower picture is, the lower line, is the European Union as a whole. And you can see that this number is between 70 and 90%, more or less. But the Greek debt to production, GDP, although for a number of years was below 100%, in the last few years it skyrocketed. It became there 167, and the prospects are that it's going to stay up there. So, coming to the main question, where did the money go and where does it go now? First, it goes to state spending. Corruption means that there is a very excessive number of civil servants. A country of 11 million people has 800,000 civil servants. And this 800,000 spend 80% of the state budget. Okay, 80%. So, I believe if with the right procedure, you can find out who are productive, who are not productive, who are doing works that have been substituted through technological change. There is a way to cut this number very radically, to cut it, let's say, by 100,000 or 150,000. But no party that is in parliament right now in Greece is willing to do that. Even small numbers, like eliminating 2,000 jobs, for example, are considered out of the question. And there are demonstrations and so on and so on. Second problem, where the money is overspent, is that the state buys at very high prices. Because of the corruption of the state mechanism, something that costs 100, the Greek state pays 150 or sometimes even 200 when it buys it. And there have been big scandals in the Defense Department, in the hospital procurement, and so on. So this is on the spending side. On the collection side, on the revenue side, the Greek government has had a very severe problem in collecting taxes. There is corruption of the tax collectors and corruption of the taxpayers. And this is not just a few taxpayers, this is at all levels of income, from the poor to the rich. There is corruption across the board. I'll give you an example by a person called, a professor in the University of Athens called Diomidis Pinelis. He was in charge in the Ministry of Economics of tax collections. And after he resigned, he went to a conference of all the tax collectors in Greece and the judicial officials. And he explained to them the 4-4-2 system. And for those of you who know anything about soccer, 4-4-2 sounds like a soccer, right? Yes, no, you don't know. Okay, there is a way to play the game 4-4-2. But what does 4-4-2 mean there? He says, well, the tax collector goes to the taxpayer and says, well, we will forgive you 40% of the tax fine because of underpayment or non-payment. You give me 40% to the tax collector, and the state collects 20%. Well, that's a terrible system, because the state collects only 20%. And that's a very serious problem by a very serious person. I mean, this guy he's not a light person. He's a person that I take very seriously. Okay. So how did Greece deal with the problem since 2009? It dealt with the so-called memos, or mnemonia in Greece. Memos of understanding between the creditors, EU, IMF, ECB means European Central Bank, and Greece. The first one was in May 2010, when the Prime Minister was Papandreou, the Economics Minister was Papakonstantinou. Essentially, it gave Greece 145 billion, 40 from the IMF, 105 from the EU, at an interest rate of 2.5%. This interest rate was very low, and it was made that low so that Greece would be able to survive. The creditors wanted Greece to reduce the budget deficit. And to a large extent now, 3 years later, or 2.5 years later, this seems to be pretty successful. The government cut wages and pensions, they cut public investment, the expenditure fell. Civil servant salaries were cut to lower levels across the board. My opinion, they would have been much better off finding which were the people who were not so productive and laid them off rather than cut everybody's wage. Because cutting everybody's wage means that people get discouraged. If I'm a civil servant, I did nothing wrong, I worked very, very hard, and then suddenly they cut my wage 25%, how would I feel? I wouldn't feel good. The second thing that the mnemonio required was structural reforms. Structural reform in labor markets, opening professions and so on. This ended up being a total failure. That is, not a single profession has been opened now 2.5 years later. Now, how did this problem finally get resolved? I'm sorry for the strange terminology. Private sector involvement, or PSI, was the official name through which the creditors and the creditors in Greece found a way to make somebody else pay for the problem. So Greece needs money, the EU doesn't want to give it more money, so they say, well, you have these bondholders, private bondholders, who are these guys, insurance companies, hedge funds, and so on and so on. Let's make sure they get paid less. So in fact, let's make sure they get paid 74% less. And these guys were the ones who got the haircut. Here's the picture of the haircut. So this was essentially the second mnemonium, the second memorandum, February 2012, when Prime Minister was Papadimos and Finance Minister was Venizelos. So essentially, they went and said, whoever has privately a bond issued by the Greek government, we will pay him only 26 cents to the dollar. 74% is wiped out. Now, at the first glance, this looks great for Greece, because there are over 100 billion that gets eliminated. On the other hand, a lot of these bonds were held by Greek banks. Greek banks, Cypriot banks, Greek pension funds. Let's leave aside the Cypriot problem. We can talk about it maybe in the questions because it's kind of even more complicated than the Greek one. But what happened is that the banks suddenly saw their own assets get slashed, 74%. So they needed extra money to get financed and survive. And therefore, the net cut of the debt wasn't really 107 billion, but only 75. Okay, because then the banks have to be refinanced and the pension funds have to be refinanced. Now we got almost to today in the memorandum number 3, when Samaras is Prime Minister, Stournaras is Economics Minister. What is this third memorandum? The banks received 40 billion to get recapitalized, not only because they lost their money from the haircut, but because most Greeks took their money abroad, legally. Because Greece is part of the European Union, everyone who has an account in Athens can take his money to France, Germany, England, the United States, wherever he wants. And the banks rely on this money being in the bank to be able to give loans. So when everybody takes the money out of the bank, they have nothing. So the banks survived, and they still survive, because of emergency loans from the European Union, from the European Central Bank. And eventually the European Union said, look, I mean, you can't really survive this way, we'll give you money. So they gave them in December $50 billion for capitalization. And Greece has received additional continuation loans, and again promised to implement structural reforms which haven't really been implemented yet. But we have seen this pattern now, because we are 3 years into the crisis, that every few months there is an evaluation of the program, of how things go by the European Union, and Greece typically falls short. Not always, but typically falls short of the targets. And then there was a discussion of extra loans and extra requirements and so on. Okay, so what is the present economic condition? Where are we now? Unemployment is very high. It's over 25%. Youth unemployment is huge. It's 58%. We have had 5 years of continuous recession. Income is down, I would guess, about 20% from 2008. Now, real income, because prices have not fallen to the 2008 level, real income is even lower. So adjusted for inflation, real income, purchasing power of people is down about 30% from 2008. And the people who suffer most are pensioners, because they have no alternatives, and they have kind of made their life work with 1,000 euros a month that they were getting, and suddenly they're getting 20% less, and they have a real problem. And the other people, the people who are always on the edge, poor, who could make it or not make it under normal circumstances. There is evidence that tax evasion has in fact increased in Greece, because in the present squeeze that businesses find themselves, they think, well, we better pay our employees first, and if we don't pay the government, well, we'll see. So with this attitude, tax evasion has in fact increased in Greece rather than decreased during the crisis. Now, what are the options for Greece? Here are the possibilities, in my opinion. 3 options. 1, implement A option, implement the structural reforms, stay in the euro, which is essentially what the government is doing. B, and I'll explain how I think the government can do more. B, reject the lenders' terms, the memoranda and so on, have a default, not pay back the creditors, go to a new currency, a new drachma. This was the position of opposition parties. It was rejected by the majority in the July 2012 election. C, and that's what I think might be the most dangerous of all, is to linger in the present situation. Not to do A, not to do, of course, B, but not really do A. So just keep going, and you have a death by 1,000 cuts for Greece. And in my opinion, A is by far the best. So I'll tell you what I think should be done right now in Greece and in what way the government can improve itself. I think the header for this is to implement the structural changes and stay in the euro. So what needs to be done? First of all, to reduce the public sector. The public sector is like a huge weight on the Greek economy. The private sector in Greece is doing pretty well. It's productive and so on and so on. But it has to support this extremely large public sector, and it's dragging down the whole economy. So, in my opinion, it's very, very important to cut the non-wage expenses of the state. The wage expenses have been cut to a large extent, but there is the non-wage expenses like procurement, buying arms, buying medicine for the health system, and so on. It would be useful to cut the number of civil servants over and above the natural attrition. 5% of civil servants, for various reasons, they retire, they die, whatever, they're gone from the labor force. But it's important to cut it more aggressively. How do you do that? First of all, you close divisions that do nothing. You might say, well, why do we even have divisions that do nothing? Well, in Greece there's a lot of inertia. You can have something that was created in 1930 and it still exists. It had some functionality in 1930, it has no functionality right now. Second, eliminate jobs that have been surpassed by technological change. For example, you had people who were just writing with a nice handwriting and filling out forms. Well, right now you have computers that do the same job. So there is a possibility to eliminate those jobs from this. And of course, evaluate the performance of the rest. I'm sorry. Okay. So number 2, taxes. It's crucially important to collect the existing taxes. The government in Greece, all the governments, find it much easier to impose new taxes rather than try to find who is not paying them. Find who is not paying them is not so easy, but it's crucially important. There's rampant tax evasion. It has to be stopped. It doesn't make sense to impose new taxes on the few people who are decent and honest and pay them. You have to really get to the point in which you reach the rest of the population. In my opinion, you need something relatively radical. The US government in the 20s created the FBI to deal with lawlessness in the Midwest. There were famous gangsters, Al Capone, others, who had killed hundreds of people, but the states were supposed to prosecute them, didn't. Illinois and other states nearby. So they created the federal mechanism to get them, and they did get them. And as you probably know, Al Capone died in the nearby jail, in Alcatraz. So this is something that Greece needs a new radical mechanism, a new organization to deal with tax evasion. And also courts that would deal quickly with tax cases, because presently the Greek courts take a number of years to deal with a case. Number 3, it needs new investments in infrastructure, and I think Alex is going to talk about this more. It needs to use more of the money that comes from the European Union, and if there is money being saved from cutting the expenditure on civil servants, you can invest in businesses that create new jobs. You need to implement the structural reforms, and again, Alex is going to talk more about that, to liberalize the labor market, open the closed professions, and other structural reforms. At the same time, these were things that Greece needs to do. Its European partners also need to do something, because the program that has been implemented in Greece is especially harsh. It requires a very fast reduction in expenditures, which is hard to do. the reduction in expenditures, sorry, I use the economics term, fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation means cutting expenditure, okay? So, and this right now is done very, very quickly. So the Greek government has appealed to the European Union to make this slower. To be able to achieve the target, but to do it slower, okay? And I think it's reasonable. And I also think it's a good idea, something that the government has not asked, but I think it should ask. It should ask the European Union not to pay the interest for a few years. Not to give it up. It still would owe it, and it will have to pay it eventually, but not to pay it for a few years. And this interest might be $5 to $6 billion, euros annually. Take this money and invest it, create jobs, make the economy run better. And eventually, as the economy runs better, to pay back the Europeans. Okay, that was option A, the best option in my opinion. Option B, reject the lender's terms, declare bankruptcy, an uncontrolled default, not back to the new drachma, create a new drachma. It's not going to be the old drachma anymore. It will not have the benefits of the old drachma. It will be something much more devalued than the old drachma. And fortunately, in July 2012, this option was rejected by the voters, but there are a number of political parties, including 3 big ones, Syriza, Independent Greeks, and Golden Dawn, that have positions which are close to option B. Okay. So, in my opinion, Greece leaving the euro will be a disaster for many reasons. Let me say 3 reasons, 3 main reasons. For reason number 1, if Greece leaves the euro, its obligations, its debts are in euros. So it doesn't matter what currency it will have. It will have to pay in euros. So if it has a very weak currency, a new drachma, very devalued currency, it would take many, many, many new drachmas to pay the present debt. So that would be a tremendous pressure on the Greek economy. Second, Greece would be forced to borrow at very high interest rates. Right now it's borrowing at 2.5% from the European Union. I remember the time in 1995 when Greece was borrowing at 15%. Now, with this crisis, Greece will have to borrow, if it were outside the euro, at 25%. I mean, these high interest rates are very, very bad for the economy. So that would not be good at all. Second problem, leaving the euro would create a lot of inflation. Why? New currency comes in, new drachma, it's devalued a lot. So the people still get paid more or less like before. The wages don't adjust very quickly. On the other hand, the prices will adjust very quickly. So which means that suddenly people who used to buy, let me say, 1 car a year, so much groceries and so on, will find that they cannot afford them. They can afford a car only every 3 years, and so on and so on. And people in Greece are used to a level of prosperity, even higher sometimes than people in the United States, or you are used to. People are used to a certain way of high consumption, and they will be much more hurt than you think. Okay, so second problem is that the Greek government, a new Greek government with a new drachma, will have to really pay the civil servants. Right? They cannot tell them, look, we don't have money to pay you. They will print money, Greek drachmas, new Greek drachmas, to pay them. And that would create an inflationary spiral. Okay? And that will create extra inflation. So we will be in a situation of what I would call hyperinflation that Greece went through during the Second World War and Germany went through in the 20s. Okay, so the most important maybe reason though is that Greece leaving the euro, even in expectation of Greece leaving the euro, before it leaves